In today's video, we're going to address one of the most popular questions in Chapter 3, and that question revolves around what happened to DogDay and how his appearance changes our perspective on Poppy Playtime and Prototype's influence on other monsters. We're going to delve deep into DogDay's history in the game, not to mention the body initiative, his relationships with other smiling creatures, and how exactly he became possessed by something and how he lost his legs and where his limbs are now. So, to start with, DogDay was originally launched along with the remaining smiling creatures. He and the rest of the gang made headlines in newspapers, based on merchandise, and of course a show dedicated to little kids. Quite amusing. In the show itself, DogDay appears as the leader of the game, and in the cartoon, he even tries to cheer up the room, like all the other characters scared, assuring that everything will be fine. Quite funny, actually. It seems like his character, which we see in Chapter 3. Unfortunately, our first encounter with him happens when he's found hanging in the prison inside the playground where you are.
I am the last of the smiling critters. Listen to me. You need to get out of this place. You need to live.
This scene initially is one of the most horrifying things we've seen in the Poppy Playtime franchise. Literally watching a man being devoured alive by small, smiling creatures as he cries out for help, writhing in pain, and then eventually becoming possessed by something. DogDay mentions a bunch of important factors, though. Firstly, he emphasizes that CatNap worships Prototype and that he will do whatever it takes to ensure the mission is demanded. He also asks us if we're here to save them and that we are the angels of Poppy. He refers to us several times as angels, but why? Where did he get that from? And just before delving into the details, he explains that millions of eyes are watching us right now, at this very moment, likely referring to the tiny smiling creatures they're about to crawl inside his body, explaining that they're so afraid of CatNap and that they'll do whatever it takes to make him happy. And in return, they'll be fed, and by feeding, I think he means cutting off the flesh of Prototype's traitors. But what's even more important, DogDay starts to explain that he and other smiling creatures tried to fight Prototype, unfortunately, though he's the last surviving smiling creature. But let's talk about why this happened. Why DogDay, from such a helpful, willing to stop Prototype, turned into an obsessed, dark look in his eyes, and ultimately in pursuit of us, which could be our death and demise. And this brings me to my first theory. I believe that something or someone has not only possessed DogDay, but also has the power to possess other monsters in the Playtime Factory. As I don't believe these monsters were inherently evil, but perhaps it's a way to make Prototype coerce these monsters to switch sides. And I believe he did this by using the CatNap gas. You see, not only did it allow him to capture children and allowed scientists to experiment on them, but it was also a way to change their thoughts and imagination, for instance, to turn into something dark and sinister, creating their form that almost depended on the CatNap gas and allowing him to take control of them. Now, this idea stems from the original Smiling Creatures cartoon, which was used as a way to tease Chapter 3. Note that all the creatures seem to fear not only the storm, but something else on the horizon. The only character in this whole story who seems to be able to somewhat overcome this is DogDay himself, being the leader of the gates. However, everything changes when the CatNap gas starts to fill the room, allowing them to be somewhat excited, uncontrollably laughing, and ultimately leading to their demise. And that's exactly it. I believe he was able to kill or possess other creatures, and that's why DogDay is the only one strong enough to overcome him, at least until this part of the game was able to do so. I suppose that it was because of this red gas that DogDay developed a pathology. And because of this, his legs simply fell off, but his consciousness and the rest of his body still remained alive. Just imagine the pain he felt when his legs detached like lifeless pieces. So you see, the goal of CatNap was very simple. Anyone or anything that stood in the way of his god, Prototype. The plan was either to torture or kill them. And after they broke DogDay down to having his bones completely split his body in half, torturing him. The only thing left was to take over his mind, and now it's the perfect opportunity, and it's already here. This is the weakest it's ever been. You see, I don't believe these little smiling creatures allow him to pursue us. However, his mind ultimately went insane from not only the pain, but the suffering, from which he eventually just gave up on it. This is Zero Day. In this situation, nothing more can be changed. Eventually, he loses his mind and turns to the dark side, and that's why he starts pursuing us throughout the gameplay. This is no longer Dog Day, but a shell of his former self, cannot be possessed as such, but something that has completely lost its mind and lost hope now. Obviously, if we play devil's advocate here, it could also be that the corpse is simply controlled by mini smiling creatures. But then it raises the question of how and why these smiling mini creatures can control his body. Or perhaps they simply take his former shell and can propel it far in unison, like a giant conveyor belt, but ultimately avoiding this former version in Dog Day as a creature that remained barricaded behind a closed door, presumably dying, and his cries of horror and agony were heard. But now the big question is, what happened to Dog Day and CatNap's relationship? Initially, they were supposed to be best friends, but something or someone accidentally intervened. Obviously, based on Dog Day's voice lines, we know that CatNap looked up to Prototype as some sort of god. And if you didn't watch the video yesterday, it's proven that Prototype saved the boy who ultimately turned into CatNap. And after that, he largely devoted his life to his new god. However, the other smiling creatures, it seems, are not so, let's say, convinced of Prototype's plan. Their morality is between what they should and should not do, something that CatNap is incapable of. However, unfortunately, the other smiling creatures, including Dog Day, actually don't have any abilities, allowing CatNap to ultimately very easily take over and leave Dog Day in a place where we find him in Chapter 3, where after poisoning with red smoke, his limbs gradually began to fall off, causing them to be taken by Prototype and remade into his body to become a full-fledged cyborg monster. As far as we know, Dog Day could have spent decades here, in this very place, subjected to torture for what reason other than sheer joy that Prototype served as a lesson to the other monsters and smiling creatures. Never challenge what Prototype has planned. But now the big question is, how did rumors spread about us being the new angels here to save not only the monsters, but finally put an end to what Prototype has planned? Poppy seems very excited. He really believes in us as characters, since Dog Day calls us his angel, an angel who will finally put an end to all of this. I don't know about you, but this seems like a lot of pressure, especially after all the other characters, it seems, received news of something similar. But I also think it's important to note that Dog Day doesn't sound like a child. He sounds like a man, which leads me to my next theory, that if Dog Day is actually Dr. White, we know a similar process happened with Braun, as the person inside him, as we know, is actually Thomas Clark, an adult man. Obviously, we know that some voice box was placed inside these toys, but this is actually a good argument. After all, the person may not have been a child, but a full-grown adult, or at least once possessed moral quality. I think there was a split in the middle. Some monsters believed that Elliot Ludwig was the devil, and others whom he either treated well or was saved by in the case of perhaps a child who was either sick or needed help, ultimately turned into the initiative of this larger body. Returning him to this rift actually went right down the middle with Poppy and, of course, Kissy Missy and the smiling creatures on one side, while the other side would be filled with Mommy Longlegs, CatNap, and possibly Boxy Boo. It really all comes down to who was in favor or not when it comes to the Hour of Joy. Killing several people inside the game, which concerns a sense of revenge or maybe just a senseless act of violence anyway, you obviously know based on this video which side Dog Day stood on, or at least hung on this poor smiling creature man, child, whoever he was. He must have suffered, not only being subjected to torture, but ultimately becoming possessed by something or someone, pursuing us on his last heavy breath until he ultimately met his demise.